The year was 1626, and the air carried the salty tang of the Hudson River. Sebastian stood in a settlement of wooden houses with thatched roofs, their structures modest and practical. New Amsterdam, he whispered, recognizing the fledgling colony. Stranger. You're no fur trader, a voice called. Sebastian turned to see a burly man, hammer in hand. He introduced himself as Peter van der Veen, a mason tasked with building homes for the settlers. Peter walked Sebastian through the settlement, explaining the logic behind their designs. The winters here are fierce, so we build small, sturdy houses with steep roofs to shed the snow. The village square was dominated by a small wooden fort and a windmill, its blades turning lazily. The streets were little more than dirt paths, but Peter showed him a crude map of a planned grid system. This land may seem wild now, but one day, Peter gestured grandly, his eyes lighting up. One day, it will rival Amsterdam. Sebastian marveled at the settlers' ambition. He could see their vision etched in the gabled rooftops and sturdy beams. Chapter 2, Georgian Symmetry. Sebastian blinked, and the world changed again. It was now the 1750s, and the bustling colonial town of New York bore little resemblance to the Dutch settlement he'd just left. Brick Georgian homes with orderly facades and symmetrical windows lined the cobblestone streets. He met Margaret Livingston, an apprentice architect with ink-stained fingers and a fiery determination in her eyes. Our designs must reflect balance, she said as they walked past Trinity Church, a majestic structure that loomed over the town. The columns, the pediments, they remind us of the order we crave in life. Margaret led him to a construction site where workers were erecting a new town hall. She pointed to the central cupola. Georgian architecture is about harmony, but it's also a symbol of power. These buildings tell the British Crown, we're here to stay. Sebastian admired the red brick houses with their white-trimmed windows, imagining the lives within. Yet he also sensed a burgeoning desire for independence in the air, a tension mirrored in the precision of the buildings. Chapter 3, Cast Iron Dreams. The streets were alive with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the rhythmic pounding of hammers on iron when Sebastian arrived in Soho in the 1850s. He stood in the middle of Broadway, now lined with ornate cast-iron buildings that seemed to glitter in the late afternoon light. Each facade was a masterpiece, its surface adorned with Corinthian columns, arched windows, and intricate floral designs. A voice broke through his thoughts. You look like you've never seen a cast-iron building before. Turning, he saw Elijah Mercer, his face smudged with soot and his hands full of blueprints. Elijah was an inventor and architect who prided himself on using cast iron, the material that was reshaping Soho. This stuff, Elijah said, slapping a freshly poured column, is the future. Strong, versatile, and cheap. You can mold it into anything you want, Greek, Roman, whatever style pleases the eye. Sebastian followed Elijah to a nearby workshop where molten iron glowed in massive furnaces. Workers poured it into molds, creating intricate patterns that would soon adorn buildings. See that? Elijah said, pointing to a half-finished building down the street. That'll be a dry goods store. But it'll look like a palace when I'm done with it. They climbed a scaffold to get a better view. From above, the streets looked like a theater set, each cast-iron facade performing a different role. Don't you think it feels theatrical? Sebastian asked. Elijah grinned. Isn't that the point? We're turning industry into art. Who says a factory can't look beautiful? As the sun dipped below the horizon, the building's intricate details caught the last rays of light, casting long, dramatic shadows. For a moment, Sebastian understood Elijah's vision, to bring elegance to the working-class cityscape, to blur the line between utility and beauty. Chapter 4, The Gilded Age. By the late 19th century, New York was dripping with opulence. Fifth Avenue was lined with mansions inspired by the Beaux-Arts movement. Clara Vanderbilt, an artist and heiress, invited Sebastian to her family's estate. The mansion was a marvel, marble columns, gilded mirrors, and painted ceilings that rivaled the palaces of Europe. Clara laughed at his wide-eyed awe. "Every detail is meant to impress," she said, twirling in the grand ballroom. "In the Gilded Age, wealth is art." Clara took him to Central Park, a masterpiece of landscape architecture by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. She spoke passionately about the park's purpose as an escape from the city's chaos. Sebastian couldn't help but feel conflicted. The Beaux-Arts movement embodied beauty and refinement, yet it often ignored the struggles of those living in the tenements. Chapter 5: The Skyscraper Boom. The 1920s brought a new kind of ambition. Sebastian found himself craning his neck to see the top of the Chrysler Building. Its shimmering Art Deco spire pierced the clouds, a testament to America's roaring prosperity. Henry Blackstone, an ambitious architect, explained the race to build taller. "Height equals power," Henry declared as they toured the Empire State Building's construction site. New York is a city that reaches for the sky. Art Deco wasn't just about height, it was about style. Sebastian admired the bold geometric patterns, sunbursts, and streamlined forms that adorned everything from skyscrapers to subway stations. The city's skyline had become a symbol of progress, its towers a beacon of modernity. Chapter 6: Post-War Pragmatism. The hum of progress was unmistakable when Sebastian found himself in 1950s Manhattan. The streets were lined with shiny sedans, and advertisements for the latest gadgets adorned every corner. Above him, the Lever House stood tall, its glass and steel facade reflecting the bustling city below. Ruth Chen was waiting for him, her dark hair pinned neatly back and her arms full of drafting tools. "Right on time," she said briskly. "We're heading to the UN headquarters next. It's a triumph of modernism." As they walked, Ruth explained the philosophy of the international style. No more ornamentation. No unnecessary fluff. A building's beauty should come from its functionality and its materials. At the United Nations headquarters, Ruth gestured at the clean, rectangular structure. Glass for transparency, steel for strength. It's a metaphor for diplomacy. Inside, Sebastian marveled at the vast General Assembly Hall, its soaring ceilings and minimalist design emphasizing the importance of the work done there. But the tour wasn't all optimism. Ruth took him to a neighborhood in the Bronx where rows of old brownstones were being torn down. "Urban renewal," she said, her tone tinged with bitterness. "The idea is to clear the slums and build modern housing. But do you know what happens to the people who live here?" Sebastian watched as families packed their belongings into carts, their faces etched with worry. "They're promised new apartments, but most never come back," Ruth said. "We're building the future on top of people's lives." The contradictions of the era weighed heavily on Sebastian. Modernism's sleek, efficient buildings symbolized progress, but they also represented the erasure of history and community. Chapter 7: Concrete and Creativity. By the time Sebastian arrived in the 1970s, the city had taken on a raw, almost defiant energy. Garbage piled up on the sidewalks, graffiti covered nearly every surface, and the once grand facades of older buildings were blackened with grime. Yet amid the chaos, creativity pulsed through the streets like an electric current. He met Tony Morales at the base of a brutalist building, a hulking concrete structure that seemed to loom menacingly over the street. "This your kind of thing?" Tony asked, smirking as he adjusted his spray paint can. Sebastian studied the building. Its stark, unadorned concrete walls and blocky geometry gave it an imposing presence. "It's honest," he said. "No pretense, no decoration. Just structure." Tony laughed. "Yeah, but it's ugly as hell. Watch this." With a flourish, Tony began painting a massive mural on the building's side. Bright reds, yellows, and blues burst across the gray concrete, forming a swirling pattern of faces and shapes. "Brutalism is all about power," Tony said as he worked. It's the city saying, we're bigger than you. My graffiti? That's me saying, not for long. They spent hours exploring abandoned warehouses and subway tunnels, where Tony's graffiti turned forgotten spaces into vibrant galleries. People see decay, Tony said, surveying his work. I see a blank canvas. Sebastian was struck by the parallel between Tony's art and the architecture of the time. Both were raw, unpolished, and unapologetically reflective of the city's struggles. Chapter 8, Revival and Resilience. The compass next took Sebastian to a somber moment in New York's history, the early 2000s. The aftermath of the September 11th attacks left a scar not just on the skyline but also on the city's soul. Sebastian stood at ground zero, surrounded by cranes and construction crews. He met Sofia Martinez, an architect working on the rebuilding efforts. Our job isn't just to replace what was lost, she said. It's to honor the memory of those who were here. Sofia showed him plans for the 9/11 memorial, with its cascading waterfalls symbolizing loss and renewal. They walked through the nearly completed One World Trade Center, a towering structure that combined strength with elegance. This is resilience, Sofia said, her voice filled with quiet pride. New York doesn't just rebuild, it reinvents itself. Sebastian was moved by the balance between remembrance and forward-thinking design. The city's architecture had become a symbol of healing, hope, and unyielding determination. Chapter 9, The Sustainable Future. The city's hum was softer now, more deliberate. When Sebastian arrived in the present day, he noticed the subtle changes immediately. Trees lined the streets, rooftop gardens flourished, and skyscrapers gleamed with solar panels. Aisha Patel greeted him with a smile. Welcome to the age of green architecture. She led him to Hudson Yards, a new development that embodied the principles of sustainability. See that? Aisha pointed to the vessel, a honeycomb-like structure in the heart of the complex. It's not just a building. It's an experience. They climbed the winding staircases of the vessel, pausing to take in the views of the city. In the distance, Sebastian spotted a high-rise with wind turbines integrated into its design. That's 625 West 57th Street, Aisha explained. It generates its own energy and collects rainwater for irrigation. Next, they visited the High Line, a repurposed elevated railway that had been transformed into a park. Aisha pointed out the native plants and sustainable materials used in its construction. This is the future of urban design, she said. We're not just building cities, we're building ecosystems. Sebastian felt a sense of hope as he walked through the city. For the first time, it seemed as though New York wasn't just adapting to its challenges, it was thriving.